I was clearly freaking out a little because I was like, this is not normal. I couldn't figure it out, could not fall back asleep that night. My doctor had prescribed Xanax. Every night I would just put a little piece of tape over covering the time on my phone. I'm scrolling through Reddit. I'm trying to figure out like more ways to just help myself sleep. I come across this Reddit comment that mentions your YouTube channel. When I first started, like the first 2 weeks after watching your videos and joining BedTyme, I had gotten a lot of, I built up a lot of hope, a lot of confidence, and a lot of like kind of like the trust in what like the message was that you were trying to relay. So my sleep actually almost immediately improved.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another really special Talking Song episode. We have Rohit with us. Welcome.
Hey, Daniel. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, anytime. It's so valuable to hear stories like yours, and just for the for people tuning in here who might be curious about how this happened. Well, it was actually I sent this kind of broadcast to everybody on our in the newsletter saying like, hey, if you're interested in becoming a sleep coach, let me know. And you expressed some interest. We were chatting, but then you were like, hey, is there any other way I can help the community? And I was like, being a guest is really, really valuable. So that's how it came to be. But with that said, tell us in yours, how did you start having trouble sleeping, Rohit?
Yeah, so I would say it was probably in like late January, February of this year. I was at the time going through a pretty stressful time in my life with a lot of like health uh, related things kind of just taking up my time. And I noticed at first, for maybe a couple of weeks, I was waking up a little earlier than I used to. For the first 26 years of my life, I had never had any sleep issues. So for me, it was super easy just to, fall asleep and then wake up 8 hours later with minor disturbances. And so for me, the first thing I noticed was I was slowly starting to wake up a little earlier in the morning. So if I would wake up at 7 normally, I would start waking up around like 6 or like 5:30, and then kind of just tossing and turning in bed until my alarm went off. Um, Honestly, I didn't make too much of it. I mean, I noticed it, but I kind of didn't really realize that it was an issue um, until I think at work I go on this on-call shift, which is a 24/7 on-call shift. So I can actually get paged in the middle of the night or go have to go on a call where I have to get out of my bed and then work on whatever, and then usually you go back to sleep. And I noticed that like all of this accumulation of like waking up early was happening, but there was this one night, um, I was on call and I got paged in the middle of the night. I woke up like normal, and then I finished up, and then maybe like 3, 4 a.m. I got back into bed, and I could not fall back asleep that night. And after that, like that was kind of like the switch for when I was like, okay, this is a problem. Like this, I've never experienced this before, and every single night after that, like it just got progressive. I became more attentive to it, and it got progressively worse. So at this point, I think that was the last night of my on-call shift. But after this, I didn't have any more pages in the night. But I would realize that um, I would wake up like 2, 3 hours after I would fall asleep, and then not be able to fall back asleep. Or if I did, it fall back asleep after like 3, 4 hours of just trying to toss and turn in my bed.
Wow. And thanks for sharing this. I think a lot of people will resonate with this familiar elements here. I want to ask you something like the health, health issues, health things that were going on in your, early in the year. Now looking back, was any of that you think, related to some kind of stress and anxiety as well, or was that like, something like, purely physical, if you will, health issues?
The So kind of like based on the lessons you taught through your philosophies, I like with health, it's something that I pay a lot of attention to. So because I'm kind of like a type A person, I'm always on top of things, and so it was I was having like actual physical health issues, um, but the problem was there's a second part of me that's also always amplifying things and making it a lot more stressful than it's supposed to be. So in a lot of ways, the the stress at that time, yeah, it probably did cause me to lose sleep, right? But at that point, kind of the secondary stress of me losing sleep took over, because eventually those health issues did get better, and they did kind of like resolve themselves. And then at a point, I was just stuck with the insomnia. So
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Very helpful. And so, yeah, we got to this point that you get the call, you don't fall back asleep. That's now on the radar, and you keep having like this like short sleep, waking up trouble, etc. And are you already starting to like kind of react to that, do things, or not? Yeah. What's happening next?
at this point, I so it actually was broken up into two phases. After this initial part happened, I was clearly freaking out a little, because I was like, this is not normal. And my predisposed knowledge of sleep at the time was like, I need sleep to be able to function. I need sleep to be able to, like, for my body to recover. I need 8 hours of sleep. Um, and what I was trying to do immediately was like, I was taking recommendations from different friends to like try different things. And some things that I tried was like CBD oil. And I think I tried melatonin. And then I remember it got so bad that I reached out to like my doctor, and at that point my doctor had prescribed Xanax to sleep. And so then I started taking Xanax to sleep, which I was very uncomfortable with, but I had to make a trade off on um, like sleep or having to take this anti-anxiety medication.
And let me ask you, like these, before you were prescribed Xanax, the recommendations from your friends. Did you find anything let just kind of temporary relief, or nothing even helped at all? Or
Yeah, it was really interesting. Like, I felt maybe like the first 1 or 2 nights things would help, and then immediately like the effect would just wear off right after that, and then it would send me into another scramble for like the next solution
yeah,
to fixing my sleep.
totally here. And at this point, you know, is it sounds like at this point, your days are probably dominated by thinking about this problem. Is that the case?
Yeah, I remember um, like traveling back home to my family to visit my family for the weekend, um, and it was like a 4-day trip, and I remember like all I talked to them about was my sleep. And yeah, that was when I realized, okay, this is like something that is becoming really bad, and it's kind of snowballing into a direction I don't want it. So yeah, like at that point, I think I was definitely super fixated on it.
Yeah, yeah. And how are things going with work?
Yeah, so I kind of covered phase one of everything. So phase two was I had that vacation back at home. I come back to Seattle, and I'm on this kind of train of every night taking Xanax to sleep, and I came down with like some sort of like sinus infection, which was like I just got sick. It was a normal sickness, right? And it wasn't clearing up. And what had happened was like the nurse had prescribed me a, what do you call it? Like a steroid. And for people who don't know, one of the side effects of steroids is that it just like puts your like adrenal system into like hyperdrive. So that night, like I had 0 hours of sleep. So in some ways, like I was, I got even more freaked out because I didn't know that at the time, and I was like, wow, this is really bad. And after that, like I was on probably getting an hour to an hour and a half of sleep for that 1 week every night. And at that point with work, I was like, I cannot function to handle work. So I actually um, took leave from work for like, well, in total it was like 5, 6 weeks. Yeah, because
Oh,
I wasn't
starting
able to
there,
do work.
it ended up being 5, 6 leave from work.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
After that experience with like taking the steroid, like the oral steroids, I was getting really no sleep at all, and my mind like was kind of pushed even further into this like cycle of like problem solving and therefore not being able to sleep. And I felt at that point like it was really bad. That was probably the worst it was. Like I couldn't take care of myself. I had to take leave from work. My mom had to come to help me when I lived in Seattle, and then eventually when I took leave from work, I went back home for like 4 to 5 weeks. It
Wow.
was that was probably the most extreme slash toughest time.
Yeah.
It was really scary too. So
No, I totally hear. No, that it sounds like, we sometimes talk about like the big one, that really intense period, and it sounds very much like that. And you know, I'm guessing you had seen this doctor who prescribed a Xanax. Like, did you go back to that doctor? Did you go to other doctor, or what were you? Which was kind of like your process? What were you trying at this point?
yeah, so let me think. So we talked about the big one, right? And I think around the time of that, just after that had happened, um, for me, it was primarily just keep taking Xanax. I was put on like my psychiatrist put me on an antidepressant, um, like an SSRI. And the hope was that like the plan with my psychiatrist was like, just take the Xanax until your antidepressant kicks in. I wasn't comfortable with that because I really didn't like taking Xanax. So I asked for like alternative sleep aids. So I was prescribed like Trazodone, um, and I think it was just Trazodone, and that did help for a little bit. I think like those first 4 or 5 weeks, I was using Trazodone to sleep, and at that time, like as that was happening, like my stress level was going down because it was actually helping me sleep. Um, and yeah, so like 4 or 5 weeks go by of Trazodone, and then all of a sudden it just like stops working, and my sleep starts going like reverting back to like like maybe 2 3 hours of sleep, and now I'm here gambling, like trying to bargain for like give me just 4 or 5 hours or something. So um, so yeah, at that point it felt like all the progress had been lost again 4 or 5 weeks later.
Wow. And you were at this point, you're back. You're staying with your parents now, or your mom?
At this point, I am at home, yes, in New Jersey.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of imagining this scenario. You found this trazodone, which kind of like, it was helpful for a couple of weeks. The anxiety was going down, but then stops working, which I'm guessing would lead to another real wave of like intense anxiety around this.
Yeah, definitely. And like knowing me, I tend to be like a problem solver, and so the second the trazodone stopped working, it was like, okay, what's next? Like, what can I do to like save my sleep, right? And then at this point, the trazodone was it wasn't like working to its full effect, but it was still kind of working. So I mean, I wasn't feeling great every day, but it was a lot better than it was, when I was at my worst. Um, but at this point, I had started researching, and then I looked into CBT-I. I found online that a lot of people had used like CBT-I, which is, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which you talked about a lot. And then I mean, the first thing I did was I signed up to get an appointment with a CBT-I professional, and then I started attending the CBT-I.
Okay, okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing this. And was this like a local like CBTI therapist, or online, or?
No, it was online through one of the like the talk therapy platforms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. And how like the structure of these programs can be a little bit different, but was it like education plus some kind of like group coaching, or was it one-on-one, or what was the structure?
So it was one on one. It basically, yeah. So after the initial call where I catch them up to speed, it was almost like a classroom oriented setting for the first like 7 8 sessions where it goes. I think CBTI has a very set curriculum. So we went through that entire curriculum and we talked about all the things, like all the CBTI principles, which are like, getting out of your bed in the middle of the night and not being in your phone, sleep hygiene, all that stuff that kind of makes up the CBTI theory. And on top of that, like um, for me personally, my therapist wasn't super keen on sleep restriction, but more so um, always waking up at the same time and go only going to bed when you're tired,
Mm.
which is in some ways a form of sleep restriction in their eyes. So yeah, I did that for I think like 8 weeks. Um, but at the end of the day, like it helped a little bit again, but I didn't really think it was sustainable for me. And I think it was particularly tough doing things like getting out of my bed in the middle of the night and like going to read when it's not something I actually enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
So
Totally. And was it like you stayed with this therapist or this program for 8 weeks, and was it because it was like an 8 week program, or was it because you felt like,
no.
yeah,
Well, I actually like it's a combination of like a normal like talk psychologist and that also practices
I see.
CBTI. So it's um, so I just they are my therapist regularly as well.
Okay.
Um, so I stopped the CBTI specifically. That's
Okay.
part of
Okay. I
that.
hear. And so at this point, things have gotten a bit easier, but I think let me, this can be hard to remember, of course, but at this
Yeah,
point, do you have a sense of like, aha, I think I understand why I've had this struggle, or not quite?
no idea, and that
Okay.
was the thing, right? And for me, I was always falling back to this point of like, is it me or is it like the medications that am I taking? Like, what is causing this, right? What is making me not sleep? And this is where like the gap in education was because I couldn't figure it out, and that was the whole thing. Like now looking back, I know it's like the fact that I was trying to figure it out was actually making it worse. Um, but at the time I didn't know it, so it felt like every time I made some advancement and then it had like an aggression, I was back at square one and I had to go figure out a different way to tackle it, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, but like the effect that it had on the rest of my life was making things worse too, right? Like I would do things that I to avoid to protect my sleep essentially. um, like I remember like my friends would all like stay up and like go out and stuff, and I would always leave early because I wanted to protect my sleep and try to go get my sleep. I would I stopped like all caffeine. I stopped eating before bed, and then like one of the more recent things was like I used to take red eye flights all the time, and since that started, I would never take a red eye because I was like, there's no way I'll sleep. This will be bad for me.
Yeah.
So things like that, right, where it shifted my lifestyle change, like also frustrated me, which I think um, kind of added to what was already going on.
Yeah, yeah, totally here. And now, one thing that was in the back of my mind was like, you had this 5 week or so leave from work, but I guess it's like around the time when you started CBTI or so, that's when you also maybe went back to work.
Yeah, I basically went back to work when about a week after I started CBTI.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And did you still have to do the like 24-hour calls where you had to be paged at night, etc.?
So no, actually, like I worked to get an accommodation to be able to not be on the night shift.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just like another example of where kind of like my fear just building into different things. So I ended up getting like yes, a medical accommodation through like the HR at my company to be to basically be exempt from that.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
No, which in my mind is kind of on one hand, you're right, it's kind of an accommodation, but on the other hand, like it could have been like really, really scary to have to do those calls again. So, maybe it was
Yeah.
a kind of a gentle and nice way to get back into work. Um, but yeah, so tell us, yeah. So essentially, just what happens next in the story is this when you start you find our ecosystem, or what happens next?
Yeah. I think about I think it was early August. So it's like late July, early August. You know, I'm scrolling through Reddit. I'm trying to figure out like more ways to just help myself sleep, right? Um, and I come across this Reddit comment that mentions your YouTube channel, and I was like, okay. And I noticed that a lot of the sentiment in that Reddit thread was, yeah, this channel is great. It helped me a lot. Um, a lot of positive things. So I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And I went to your YouTube channel, Sleep Coach School, and I went to your playlist called This Is Natto. And I remember like sitting there at work that one day, and I watched the entire playlist. I didn't do any work that day. I just watched the whole thing after lunch all the way to the end of work. And after like, I don't know, it's something about the structure of it and something about, I don't know, the way you kind of delivered the concepts. It something just clicked with me super quickly, and all of a sudden I felt a lot of motivation. It was a really weird feeling. I felt a lot of motivation, a lot of hope, kind of restored for the way I approached my sleep and in my insomnia. So yeah, after that, I mean, at this time I hadn't signed up for BedTyme yet, but like I just had your playlist saved, and I remember at one point I was like watching each video and like taking notes and kind of like trying to internalize all these concepts and then trying to practice them at night. And I think about a week after that, I was like, I might as well just go for it all. And so I signed up for BedTyme. And actually, I signed up for BedTyme after seeing Chris's video, his interview. And funny enough, he ended up being my coach, which was really cool. So yeah, I did that a week later, and then I started, flipping through BedTyme, with the one a day prompts. And yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna say that like the first 1, 2 months were easy. I mean, it definitely took a long time for improvement to come, but it did come slowly and not in a straight line, but it did come. So by going through the program.
Wow. Now I imagined you in front, like at work, finding the playlist, and then like being like, oh, it's nice because you can see like on one hand, realizing that a lot of things that you've been told, have you approached things have been kind of not so helpful. It can be sometimes that of course can be like, oh, why did I do this way? But on the other hand, it can be kind of a relief to realize that much of what you've been told is actually not quite helpful and not correct. So I think it must have been a great relief to see like, okay, this probably is more true, right? Something like that.
Exactly. And I think some of the other highlights that kind of really stuck out to me were, and I'm sure we'll talk about them eventually, but like um, definitely what you just had mentioned. The second thing was kind of the behaviors that our brain tries to kind of exhibit, and for me to understand what my brain is trying to do was really important because it allowed me to reflect on like, okay, in this moment, what is my brain actually trying to tell me to do, and is it reflecting reality? Um, and then the third thing I think that was super important was just like being, you know, you know, uh, just understanding that a lot of this is stemming from hyperarousal, which I didn't really have a concept of before either. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I want to ask you something like first of the two things you said here was kind of like, understanding what my brain was trying to do and, what it was trying to say, et cetera, et cetera. Can you, do you remember any kind of like
Yeah.
specifics to that?
Yeah. Probably the most prevalent thing was like asking, like my brain would consistently like pose this question, like, is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with me? And like a lot of the times I would just take that and go with it because that prompt would take me down this like problem solving route of like, oh, is it this that can be causing my sleep issues, or is it this? Is it like so like the medications, or is it like the fact that I'm, you know, not that I'm looking at screens before I'm going to bed, or something like that, right? And after reflecting and going through your program, now every time that question comes up, even when I have my struggles now, it's more so like, well, is my brain just trying to protect me from something that is actually not a real threat, right? And that immediately like kind of cancels out that entire thought road that I go down after. So
Yeah. No, that's amazingly said. So I'm just going to kind of repeat it just to contextualize for the audience here that when we hear the question like, is something wrong? And we almost take it at face value, like, okay, my brain's saying something's wrong. That means probably something is wrong. Let's try to figure out what is wrong. Then we're immediately in this kind of problem solving loop. And as you said, like problem solving itself makes us kind of hyper aroused and anxious. And then it seems like something is wrong, because we're, for example, not sleeping well. But on the other hand, we hear the question like, "Is something wrong?" And we're like, "Oh, that's just my brain trying to help me." Then it's almost like we stepped out of, like, instead of being like in that question, we're stepping out and looking at it from the outside, and we're just like leaving it where it is, and then it kind of self resolves. So wonderful that you saw that. And the second thing what was the second thing you said was really helpful was.
it was just understanding that everything is stemming from hyperarousal and being able to
Yeah,
tell myself after a bad night that I was just hyperaroused. That's it.
yeah, exactly,
That was
exactly.
actually that was really important for me actually, right? Because when you generalize it, I was just hyperaroused, right? It just gives you that one reason, and you're kind of done with it. You're like, okay, yeah, I was hyper aroused, and now I'm going to move on, right? You're once again, it's kind of like not going into that deep analysis of your sleep and like what's affecting it. So
Yeah, I know that I've heard actually so many people say that just learning about hyperarousal is so helpful for them. And just a quick follow-up question for you is this one, like, some, yeah, just some common experiences of hyperarousal that just pop into my mind are like, breathing fast, palpitations,
yeah.
jerkiness, jitteriness. Did you have those type of physical manifestations?
I remember there was like when it like first started back in like February, March, like after that first night where I couldn't sleep, I had this one like I've always had like sleep paralysis. I always understood what it was, and so I wasn't really concerned with that, because I've experienced that in the past. But then I remember like when I was super sleep deprived and I was trying to sleep, I would just start jerking every part of my body, every all over the place, and it was like really concerning. But I think at least that I understood was like I'm my body's just like not happy with me.
Yeah.
But more than that, I think in terms of hyperarousal, for me, it was like this hypersleep, I think is what you
Yeah.
call it, where I'm like I would actually never had any issues falling asleep. And it was more so for me, the pattern was like fall asleep, wake up an hour and a half to 2 hours after, and then the rest of the night, like I'd either be up or I'd be in this state of hypersleep on and off throughout the night. That's usually how it was. So that was kind of like how my hyperarousal manifested on top of like racing thoughts about like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I think so many people resonate with this one too. And just for anyone who hasn't heard that term before, like hypersleep is what we call this, like sleep, but mixed in with a lot of hyperarousal. So it's like time skipping ahead. We're like, did I sleep or not? I'm not sure. Some vivid dreams, something like that, and which can be really scary. A lot of people think like this means something is wrong, and then as you point out, when we see like, no, this is also just another way we experience hyperarousal, can be
yeah.
really really helpful.
The
And
vivid,
tell us,
I would
yeah,
say,
yeah,
sorry, real quick, the vivid dreams, I did get a lot of vivid dreams, and a lot of them, like that was another thing that was super concerning to me. That I realized, okay, this is all part of like once again this hyper arousal state. I was having like a lot of nightmares and stuff, especially in those second halves of nights, and I think for me those actually died down when I realized, okay, yeah, this is just all part of the hyper arousal sphere. So
yeah, super, super nice to hear that. And oh yeah, I was gonna ask you. It was interesting. You said you had just watched that, Chris's video, and then you actually ended up with him by chance.
yeah,
As a coach in BedTyme. And yeah, how was it working with Chris?
yeah. I mean, Chris was as when I was super actively using the app, I Chris was great. I mean, I would feel super comfortable just sending him like quick updates, right? Or like when I didn't have questions and stuff. And he was super responsive, and he honestly offered a lot of great insight and a lot of personal tips that he used during his recovery. Like for example, I was talking about earlier, like I did when I was doing CBT-I didn't enjoy like getting out of my bed and reading because that's just something I don't find enjoyment in. For me, it was like staying in my bed and then just like browsing my phone or watching Netflix. And one of my biggest concerns was like I don't want to see the time on my phone when I'm doing that. So Chris was like, "Yeah, I had the same issue. All I did was take a piece of tape and cover like the top left corner of my phone. So I mean, like up until like a month ago, for 3 months, I every night I would just put a little piece of tape over covering the time on my phone, and then just use my phone at night and stuff like that. Like I think that those nuances were super important for me, and working with Chris, but also for anyone working with like a direct sleep coach.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, super, super nice. I'm so glad that happened. And um, I was gonna ask you. Oh, so yeah, you were on bedtime for 3 months or so.
I would say 2 months.
2 months, yeah.
Yeah, 2 months.
And during this time, would you say like, you know, it's never a linear path, but
Of course.
for some people it's more like kind of dramatic. Like one night, some people say like, "Oh, wow, I slept really well," and then, "Oh no, I'm back," and it's kind of very jumpy
Yeah.
up and down. For some people, it's more like it's sort of like step up, little step down, little step up, something like that. So, how was your journey, if you would describe it?
Yeah, I think um, when I first started, like the first 2 weeks after watching your videos and joining BedTyme, I had gotten I built up a lot of hope, a lot of confidence, and a lot of like kind of like the trust in what like the message was that you were trying to relay. Um, so my sleep actually almost immediately improved. Like I think the first or second night, I slept a lot more. Albeit at this time, I think at this time I was on a different sleep medication. Also, I was on like doxepin, which is helping maintain my sleep. So, but my sleep, even like with me taking that, had improved um, on top of what it was before. And I noticed that I was sticking to some good sleep. And when I say good sleep, this was like 5.5 hours at the time, um, for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden, like randomly one night, my sleep just like went off, off the cliff again. And there's no precipitating reason, or not precipitating, but like reason that I could think of that as to why it happened. So once again, just because of like the previous trauma around it, my mind kind of like reverted back to like, okay, what happened here, right? How can we solve this? And I think the biggest thing there was like having, like talking to Chris about it and just having that constant reminder that, roadblocks are a thing, and you will have setbacks and they'll happen when you don't expect it. They'll happen for seemingly no reason. And, and the important thing is to just stick to the core of natto and be kind to yourself, even when those setbacks happen because they're expected. So, um, yeah, like I'd say after that initial 2, 3 weeks, I did have a setback, and it was like probably it wasn't that long. It was probably like 4 days, but like those 4 days, I had like zero sleep, and it was tough because I had to still convince myself that long term, what I'm doing is going to work out, and I think
Yeah.
that's the hardest part, and kind of sticking to it. So
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And it's like so many other things in life that when we're in it, we don't know when it's going to end. So it's of course really really frightening. And then, but in the rearview mirror, you can see like it actually only lasted 4 days. And so it's not so scary when we look back. But we're in it, of course, then we don't know that. But yeah, super helpful that you share this common. It's so common to have these speed bumps, of course. And then you graduated BedTyme. I'm guessing that must have been like August, September, October, maybe 2 months ago or so.
yeah, a month and a half ago
Okay,
ish, yeah,
okay.
something like that.
And yeah, how have things been going since then?
Yeah, I don't want to say I'm sleeping like I used to before everything started, but I think the big thing for me is I'm at a point where now I'm also off medications, and talk about weaning off that as well. But um, I'm off medications and I'm sleeping enough for me to just be like mentally alert and do what I can and like live my life and not have and be in a spot where I'm not thinking about my sleep all the time, which is so liberating
Yeah.
compared to before. And I think Um, yeah, I'm doing a lot better, honestly, and I feel great, and you know, uh, my sleep confidence is a lot better than it used to be. Um, it's not all the way back. I think it'll take a long time to build back as I do more and more things that, are threatening to my sleep. But yeah, I'm doing a lot better today, and um, I yeah, it just feels so crazy that like 6 months ago I wouldn't have. I was thinking like that I would never feel this way again. So
Yeah, I know. I was almost about to ask you that question because so many people that are in a program or in some difficulty say like, "Hey, Daniel, like I don't see myself ever getting out of this." And at some point, you had those thoughts too.
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said and earlier, like I was constantly asking myself, like, do I have to just accept this as my reality? And if I do, what is the contingent, all the contingent stuff that's like based on that, right? And at like the worst week when it was really bad, I remember like going to it was like when my mom had come to help me out in Seattle, I was just like in the middle of the night, I was just like begging to like go to the hospital so they can put me to sleep.
Wow. Yeah.
So anything to for sleep, right? And I thought that was at that time I was like so stuck that this is my reality. Like this is how my life is gonna be. It was really scary. So
Wow.
yeah, it feels crazy being on this side of it.
Wow. No, thanks for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you, yeah, actually, um, I tend to, keep these interviews like, maybe like 40, 45 minutes, something like that,
Yep,
which means we still have a time to share some more insights from you. And one of them was actually like what you mentioned briefly, coming off the medications.
yep.
What was that experience for you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I was never comfortable with taking medications to sleep. I wasn't a fan of it. So for me, I think the big thing was I definitely wanted to wean off. And for me, I was on this like constant dose every night of like, I forgot how many milligrams of doxepin, but I would take it every night before I go to bed. And my strategy was like to wean off of it, was to just, and I worked with my doctor to do this, but like it was to just like kind of cut it in half, like every couple months. And I was comfortable with doing it slowly. And I think the craziest thing was like how I actually got off of it was like I had cut it. I had planned to wean off over like 3 4 months, and somewhere in the second month, um, I was staying at my girlfriend's place, and I fell asleep. And I looked at the the bedside table in the morning, and I realized my pillow was sitting there, and I had slept like 7 hours that night, and I was like, "Whoa!" Like I forgot to take my pill, and I just like fell asleep, and I felt great. And then I realized, what if my pill was just more so at this point? Like, what if this dosage that I've cut in half was actually not doing anything for me? And what if it was just mental at that point? So at that point, I was like, I'm not taking this pill again. Like, I clearly gave myself an example that I was able to sleep well one night without taking that pill. And so after that, I just stopped taking it. Like, instead of weaning off for 4 months, about a month and a half in, or 2 months in, I just stopped taking them, and like granted, I've been sleeping just fine without them. So that was really funny to me. So
Yeah, no, I'm smiling too for the same reason. That's like life is funny like that, and I often share with people that this is not uncommon. That we have as soon as we have kind of a plan for like, okay, I'm gonna get off this way, and I'm okay with that plan. Then very often you don't get to that point where you're like, oh, this is the last pill. Let's.
yep,
Oftentimes it's something else happens. Like you forget to take it, and you realize, oh, kind of we naturally come off them because we see that they aren't really doing anything at that point. But all right. Final questions for you is if you could, go back in time and tell yourself something when you were having a really difficult time, what would you tell yourself?
yeah. Um, Man, first thing is go find Daniel's channel. um, but no, in all seriousness, like having the knowledge I have now and like kind of putting it back into the perspective of that time. And actually, for a lot of things in life, I actually think a lot of the lessons are applicable to more than just sleep. It's just like kind of going back to this attitude of like it is what it is. And I even like even now with my sleep, I constantly tell myself that. I think at the end of the day, like natto is and it saying it is what it is are like very core, powerful statements that kind of encapsulate all the learnings underneath it.
Yeah.
Um, back then I was super scared, right? And I wanted to problem solve everything, but like not everything can be solved like that in the way that you expect it. And knowing that now, just accepting your reality, um, and and doing the opposite of sometimes what your problem solving tendencies want you to do is sometimes the best way out of things. So that's probably the biggest thing I would want to tell myself. But also at the same time, I also always think about this, and I'm like, I would never like want to wish for a different experience because this experience has taught me a lot about myself, has taught me a lot about like general, you know, psychology and also philosophy towards my life with like insomnia, but other things. So I always tell people like I wouldn't trade anything to, not have that previous experience in my life. It's been so valuable to me, no matter despite how, you know, crappy it was at the time.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Yeah, that's what I wish for everyone. Everyone. I wish for everyone who and finds our ecosystem to find that. Yes, it's a really difficult time, but you can learn things that will help for the rest of your life. And that that was my last question for you, which you already kind of answered, but um, maybe you can give examples or maybe speculate,
mhm.
or just my question to you is like, have you already experienced, or do you see other areas in life where what you learned will help?
Yeah, I mean, earlier I think I was saying that I'm a super on top of things person, and I'm a planner, and for me, like tend to get anxious when things don't go a certain way that I expect. So even things like I'm right now. I'm in Colombia right now, and like I'm here for a month, and um, like I was just so coming into it, I was so nervous about just like what if this happens at work and I have to like fly back, or like what if like I get sick here and something happens, and I need to, fly back, or I have to get taken care of here. Um, Using the same exact principles that I learned with like the natto philosophy about like, um, my brain trying to warn me of threats that might not be there, and B, about like just like being so attached to this notion of like this fear, and eventually just being able to say like, yeah, it is what it is, and eventually it'll sort itself out if something does happen. That's kind of how I've been trying to apply things forward using
Yeah.
that philosophy. So
Oh, looks sounds wonderful. So glad. And so yeah, with that said, I'll just say it was really nice getting to connect with you today, and thanks so much for being a guest today.
yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. I appreciate everything.
Anytime, Rohit. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.